How's it going, folks? Dave Brown here with the New Populist. Thank you again for joining me. So, last night we had the Republican debate, which I did sit down and watch front to back. It was a little bit painful to do that, although there were a few parts of the debate that were interesting. Of course, Donald Trump did not participate, he was with Tucker Carlson. And as he told Tucker, there was no reason for him to be there, being the front runner, being the former president, being up by 50 points. If he showed up, it would have been a complete bleep show. Everybody, maybe without the exception of Vivek, would have just attacked him the entire time, and it would have been very unproductive, more unproductive than it already was. So I want to just really just briefly summarize each candidate and their performance before focusing in on a couple of spots that I thought were particularly interesting with DeSantis and Nikki Haley. But starting with the candidates, Mike Pence, I used to think he was okay during the Trump administration, but the more I see of him, especially since that Tucker Carlson interview, he really comes off like I don't know, chip on his shoulder. Just, I think he's actually too a true believer in the BS he's selling. He's just one of these really old school, stiff Republicans who buys into what he's selling, and he comes off more and more unlikable the more I see him. So I really didn't think he came off well at all, especially trying to condescend toward Vivek and saying, I'm the guy with experience. I've done this and I've done that. And what exactly have you done? The Republican Party, the last 20 years, save Donald Trump, has been pretty crappy. So if he's appealing to people by saying, here's my record, I'm not sure that's really going to work. So the more I see of him, the more I just don't like him. Then we have Ron DeSantis. I think the whole thing for him was a wash. He didn't really raise his star, and he lacks charisma, and he doesn't really connect with people, and that's going to be his problem going forward. At the state level, you can get away with not having very much charisma. National politics, especially in the era of Trump, who is very magnetic and has that personality, when you don't have it, it really stands out like a sore thumb, and that's a problem for Ron DeSantis. Nikki Haley, Neocon, through and through. I'm going to cover it later, but the one time in the debate where we had somebody really get super intense, it had to do with foreign policy, and boy, she was just absolutely eyes popping out of her head. People thought that it was a good moment for her. I found it actually somewhat deranged how intense she was about funding all these proxy wars around the world. So I people think that she did well there. Talking over Vivek, I thought she came off like a maniac. Vivek, he had some good one-liners. He's a good speaker. He did fairly well. He did allow again Nikki Haley to talk over him, which did not look good. Although again, I think it really was bad look for Haley to come off that unhinged. But Vivek, not bad, and I think he really has secured his place as second or third behind Trump. Then Tim Scott. Tim Scott's a weird one for me because he comes off as a very likable guy, and his whole pitch was like, "Hey, let's be nice. I'm all smiles, all positivity." But when you actually zero in on some of his policy positions, specifically foreign policy, he is a dyed-in-the-wool neocon still. And just because somebody is nice and they're likable doesn't mean you want them to have power, because they could still be a complete maniac. So don't be fooled by Tim Scott. Personally, maybe a very nice guy. Behind that, there's not much there, and when it comes to foreign policy again, just a neocon. And then we have Chris Christie, and as usual, who cares what Chris Christie says? And then there were a few other guys who I think Ada Hutchinson and some other dude, who cares? They were really non-factors in all this. But I want to go back to Ron DeSantis, because everybody thinks that Ron DeSantis is the guy to replace Trump in the future. and that he is the better alternative to Trump. But I have two clips here, and I've talked about his lack of charisma, not connecting, but there's also an issue with him not being clear about where he stands and sort of is indecisive. And sometimes it's better to be decisive and be wrong than show hesitancy, not being sure. It makes you look weak when you do that. So, two clips here. The first one, whether or not we should fund the war in Ukraine.
On stage who would not support the increase of more funding to Ukraine.
We would not support it.
So Vivek, hand goes straight up in the air. He's very clear about it. DeSantis is doing this halfway, and then the rest of the candidates, of course, they're all going to fund the Ukraine war. But the problem here is that DeSantis is scared of the military-industrial complex. But on the other hand, he also knows that many in the Republican base are tired of funding this war, and so he's trying to straddle the fence and try to thread the needle. But all he's doing is making himself look weak and indecisive, and it's not a good look. I'll keep playing the clip.
Needs to step up. I mean, I would have Europe step up and do their job.
Mr. Ramaswamy, but you're saying you would not too, Governor DeSantis?
I will have Europe pull their weight. Right now, they're not doing that,
would not support
and I think we
more
need
funding.
to do. And I think our
He doesn't
support
want to
should
answer
be
the question
contingent
because
on them
he's
doing
scared
it.
to answer
And
it.
I would have support in China to be able to take China and do what we need to do with China.
Mr. Ramaswamy.
I'm not sure what he said there. Again, it looks bad when you're not decisive. And DeSantis, it's not a good look. Stop doing it. Just make a decision, right or wrong. Just make a decision. And so that's his lack of clarity there. And now here's the clip when they're asked, will you support Trump if he's the nominee?
If former President Trump is convicted in a court of law, would you still support him as your party's choice? Please raise your hand if you would.
So Vivek, once again, straight in the air, followed by Nikki Haley and Tim Scott. And there's DeSantis, still not sure yet. He's looking around. Watch him. He'll start looking around, and then his hand will creep up when he sees that other people are raising their hands. There it goes, halfway up. Indecisive. That's what it is when you do that. You are indecisive. And if DeSantis doesn't grow a pair and just have a position and stand by it, he's just going to continue to look weak, and he's going to continue to plummet in the polls. He is the sitting governor of Florida. He has national attention for the last 4 or 5 years, and he's losing to a 38-year-old guy named Vivek, who has no experience in government. He's falling behind that guy in the polls. Man, that's bad. And if you like DeSantis, I'm not trying to rain on the parade here, but he needs to change a lot, and I don't know if he can, because a lot of these candidates, they do well at the state level, and then when they go national, they get exposed. And unfortunately, this is kind of what's happened here to DeSantis. He may not have what it takes to be president or win the nomination, and that's just the reality of it. Now I want to go to Nikki Haley, an exchange he had with Vivek. They got very contentious, and as I said earlier, you almost saw the blood coming out of her eyes. She was so like, my Lord. And people thought that this was a good moment for her. I disagree, and I'll break down the clip here. And she just goes rapid fire with all this sort of nonsense, and this is all about the Ukraine war, Israel, and funding foreign wars.
Governor Haley, you did not raise your hand, meaning that you would support more funding for the Ukraine war. You have said of Governor DeSantis that you didn't appreciate it when he initially called it a territorial dispute. Why?
First of all, the American president needs to have moral clarity. They need to know the difference between right and wrong. They need to know the difference between good and evil.
That's rich. This I've talked about it before, this idea that everything is black and white. America is the good guy, no questions asked, and China and Russia, they're the bad guys, no questions asked. And so when you have that sort of mindset, that it's that black and white, you're taking a really militant position where essentially there's no diplomacy, there's no reaching out and trying to work things out. It is they're evil and they must be destroyed. And so when I see a presidential candidate talk in those terms, especially given our track record the last several years, the last several decades of our foreign interference, our proxy wars, our tumbling other governments, other democracies, and we're going to sit on our high horse and pretend that we're always the good guy. Well, we have to be, honest and acknowledge that's not always the case. A lot of times we have a lot of gray. We're a great power, and we're trying to maintain that power. And that's really what it boils down to. Power, money, economics. It's not a biblical story of good and evil that these certain politicians want to make it out to be. And when they do that, my antenna goes up immediately.
When you look at the situation with Russia and Ukraine, here you have a pro-American country that was invaded by a thug. So when you want to talk about what has been given to Ukraine, less than 3.5% of our defense budget has been given to Ukraine. If you look at the percentages per GDP, 11 of the European countries have given more than the U.S. But what's really important is go back to when China and Russia held hands, shook hands before the Olympics, and named themselves unlimited partners. A win for Russia is a win for China. We have to know that. Ukraine is the first line of defense for us. And the problem that Vivek...
First line of defense for us. Really? First line of defense. If anybody's actually paid attention to what the Russians have said, this again, I don't want to go over the last 10 years of the Ukraine war, and because they've had the civil war since 2014, but it's so much more complicated. And we look at these areas, Ukraine, Taiwan, they're simply just outposts for us to attack our geopolitical enemies. And so Ukraine is our first line of defense. What is Russia's first line of defense? Put yourself in their shoes. What is their first line of defense? They have a country on their border with people in it who are nationalists to the core. Some of these Azov types hate Russians. They've been shelling the Donbass, where the ethnic Russians have been for the last 8 years. What is Russia's first line of defense? Because I'm trying to figure out, here I am in America, in Maryland. That's on the other side of the world. So apparently everywhere in the world is a first line of defense for us. But we never ask, how do other countries, other great powers, China and Russia, how do they view what is their first line of defense? And I would say that for Russia, you got a country on their border, hundreds of miles of border, they might have a little more interest in that country or reason to be really particular about that country than we do. But we never put ourselves in the shoes of the other guy. They're just evil blocks. That's Russia is just full of 140 million evil people, and we have to destroy them. That's all we look at it as. China, 1.3 billion people, just evil communists, and we have to defend against them. That's our mindset. It's so tiring. And it's so destructive.
Doesn't understand is he wants to hand Ukraine to Russia. He wants to let China eat Taiwan. He wants to go and stop funding Israel.
Taiwan again. Reminder: the U.S. State Department. We look at we acknowledge the one China policy, meaning that Taiwan is part of China. I talked about that before. We have this double speak. Oh yeah, it's part of China. But at the same time, we're going to give them weapons so that they can fight the Chinese. It's all a game. It's tiresome.
You don't do that to friends. What you do instead is you have the backs of your friends. Ukraine is the front line of defense. Putin has said, once Russia takes Ukraine, Poland and the Baltics are next.
So after Putin, Russia take Ukraine, and of course they don't even have the soldiers to do that, they had to have this partial mobilization back in September of last year just to make sure they could hold on to the parts of the Donbass. They're going to sweep across Ukraine and then go into Poland, the Baltics. Who actually believes that? Who actually believes that's going to happen? There's a reason why Russia won't strike within Poland, reason why they won't strike in Romania, even though there's weapons that are coming across the border, because they know if they do that, Article 5 World War. They are not going to invade Poland. Anybody who says that is a moron. Nikki Haley is a moron for thinking that it's a realistic thing that Russia will invade Poland. Now, Dmitry Medvedev, I always get his name wrong. He is a guy in Russia who says all this trolling things on Twitter. We're gonna go into Western Europe. We're gonna invade everybody. That's not the policy. He's trolling. He's messing with people. Putin's the guy who runs the policy, and Putin has not said that they're going to invade Poland or the Baltic states. That is not going to happen. Bet on that.
That's a world war. We're trying to prevent war. Look at what Putin did today. He killed Prigozhin. When I was at the UN, the Russian ambassador suddenly died.
It's funny. So I did a video yesterday about Prigozhin being killed, and of course it was most likely Putin. I'll bet my life on that. What I find funny about Nikki Haley, she is so quick, very quick, immediately. Putin did it. Putin did it. Putin did it. But let's go back to that clip with Tucker Carlson when she was asked who blew up Nord Stream pipeline, and watch again her face as she knows exactly what the truth is, but she's so committed that she just sits there and you can see her face kind of contorting, just doesn't want to answer the question. She's looking for a deflection. She is not an honest person. Check it out.
Of energy in the military, who blew up the Nord Stream pipeline?
Look at that face.
I mean, I don't know.
I'm not claiming you did it.
No.
I'm just kidding. No, I don't know. I mean,
she's a fraud.
Do you know who did it?
She knows.
It seems pretty obvious it was backed by the Biden administration, I would say. I mean, I think all the evidence suggests that, but I wasn't there. But I mean, that seems like
these people are
a huge
frauds.
step. This is the largest industrial sabotage in history, sent more carbon in the atmosphere than any act ever. And there's weirdly no curiosity about who did it. And I think
no.
Strange.
I said before, we could impeach Biden on that.
Strange with the Biden administration. This is the first one.
I guess what I'm really
Tucker's
saying
still
is
digging, trying to get her to ask the
against
question.
the Biden administration to do something like that and shaft our closest allies in the world, which would be Western Europe, and deprive them of the energy they need to run their manufacturing sector and destroy their economy, which it is in the process of doing. That's a major sin to have done something like that. You just betrayed our allies, and no one on the right is accusing the Bidens of what they clearly did.
Again.
So I don't know why.
Well, no one is accusing the Bidens aren't being accountable on anything. I mean, you look at the cocaine that was just found in there. And
then she goes on about the cocaine, which is a who gives a crap story. What's more important? A little baggie of cocaine that Hunter probably dropped somewhere, or the largest act of industrial sabotage in world history? Which one's more important? Well, Nikki Haley wants to talk about the bag of cocaine, not the attack on Nord Stream, which was in all likelihood done by the Biden administration and the CIA. So but when it comes to Putin and China, oh yeah, they did this, they did that. Not an honest person. It really drives me nuts.
This guy is a murderer, and you are choosing a murderer over
A murderer.
American country.
A pro-American country that we helped overthrow the government in 2014.
First of all, Mr. Ramaswamy, you have 30 seconds. Mr. DeSantis,
Nikki, I wish you well in your future career on the boards of Lockheed and Raytheon.
I'm not on
but the fact of the matter,
That is true. She wasn't on those boards. She was on the board of Boeing, another huge defense contractor, and she resigned in 2020. But she was on the board of a defense contractor. He just got the wrong ones there.
And
Boeing came off of it, but you've been
pushing
this lie. You've been pushing this lie all week, Nikki.
You want to go and defund Israel? You want to
okay, let me address that. I'm glad you brought that up. I'm going to address each of those right now. This is the false lies of a professional politician. There you have it.
Your watch,
so the reality
make America less safe. You have no foreign policy experience, and it shows.
And you know what? The foreign policy experience.
The only time they get fired, these neocons are talking about war in other countries.
relationship. It is a friendship. And you know what friends do? Friends help each other stand on their own 2 feet. So I will lead Abraham Accords 2.0. I will partner with Israel to make sure Iran never is nuclear armed. But you know what I love about Israel? And I've been there probably in the last 10 years more than most people on this stage. You know what I love about them? I love their border policies. I love their tough on crime policies. I love that they have a national identity and an iron dome to protect their homeland. And so, yes, I want to learn from the friends that we're supporting. And what puzzles me is, I want to learn from those and apply those to protect our homeland, Nikki.
Israel
needs
America. America needs Israel.
Okay. America, hold on. We give them money, but they don't need us. We need them. We, the United States, with the Pacific and the Atlantic, we need them. Never mind all the bases we have in the Middle East surrounding Israel. I can't even comprehend that. It's not about whether or not you think we should fund Israel. Her idea that they're doing us a favor by taking our money, because they're going to go on the offensive against the Iranians and hold them in place. I guess that's the argument. But again, they get so fired up, these neocons. It comes to Taiwan, Israel, Ukraine, and they have a record of monumental failure ever since the invasion of Iraq back in 2003. Failure. Iraq was a failure. Afghanistan, a complete mess. Libya, got rid of Gaddafi, the whole place collapsed. We fund this war in Syria for the last several years. The moderate rebels who are really just terrorists to prolong that civil war against Assad. Assad is still in power. That was a failure. How many times do we fail in our foreign policy before we question the experts like Nikki Haley, who chastises Vivek for his lack of foreign policy experience? What have the people running our foreign policy done for us to prove that they're deserving of continuing to run our foreign policy? They have been a disaster. So all these candidates on stage, they want to keep supporting the Ukraine war. Just one problem. We are the West. We're losing that war. Russia is fully committed. They will not step back. They offered terms last April before they were scuttled by Boris Johnson that were fairly reasonable terms. And at this point, as committed as they are, there's no turning around. There is no Russia is going to lose. They can't afford that. And so they will press forward until they are satisfied. Only then will they sit down and allow the Ukrainians to have some sort of deal where they end hostilities. So this whole thing is going to backfire on us. And one thing I want to point out and make clear: if you support this Ukraine proxy war, I'm not saying it's not an anti-Ukraine thing. Even if you support it, you have to acknowledge that they simply don't have the ability to win. All they have the ability to do is to slow down the Russian progression, and at the cost of tens of thousands of lives. Again, every day they're kidnapping young men off the streets and trying to, forcing them to the front lines after a few weeks training. Supporting this war at this point is not a humanitarian thing. You're just prolonging the suffering. And this is not a pro-Russia statement. It's a pro-reality statement. And to keep dangling the next wonder weapon in front of them. We'll give you the F-16s, and 6 months from now we'll give you the F-16s. We got to train the pilots who don't speak English, who have no experience in these craft. But in 6 months, maybe you'll get these F-16s. Will this war be going on in 6 months? And when you get these F-16s, how long are they going to last? No one actually talks about these specifics. They just say, we're going to give them these weapons, and that's going to change everything. Have the HIMARS changed everything, or the Storm Shadows? Have they changed everything? No. They're an inconvenience for the Russians. Every once in a while, the HIMARS, they hit some spot. Maybe they kill a colonel, somebody up front. And yes, that hurts the Russians. But these aren't game changers. It is, when you look at war, you look at the big picture. Manufacturing capacity, troops on the ground, available manpower. Over time, what happens? Well, Russia has that manpower. They have the manufacturing capacity. And at this point, they are fully committed, and they cannot back down. And all we're doing is clash, clash, clash. You know, extend the war, extend the war. Getting more people killed. And we're going to look back in 5 years or 10 years and go, why did we do that for? Why did we sacrifice this entire country? You know, and it didn't hurt Russia in the long run. They consolidated their position. They got closer to China. They learned that they could survive without being connected to the Western system. They became self-sufficient. Complete backfire. But for the neocons in Washington, D.C., that's generally what they do. They plan things out. They plot things out. It backfires miserably. Doesn't work. But the defense contractors, the MIC, everybody's getting paid. They're making money. So even when they lose, they don't really lose. You know, people who actually lose are people like me and you, the Ukrainians, who are out there fighting and dying. So this Republican debate, fairly unimpressive, and I think people summed it up best by saying this. The winner of this debate was Donald Trump. It's very clear after watching this that there's no real challenger to him. It's not DeSantis. It's not Haley. Certainly isn't Krispy Kreme Crispy. And Vivek, nice guy, 38, a little young, and people are saying he's probably angling toward a spot, VP spot. But we have plenty of time. It's August. We've got another 6 months. Who knows what's going to happen? And especially with these indictments, very interesting. The next several months. So we'll just have to wait and see. Well, that is it for now. If you are new to my channel, please like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.